You might not watch football, you may have never bought a jersey, and perhaps you also have no intention of spending thousands of dollars to go to the 2026 World Cup. But that doesn't mean the World Cup doesn't concern you, because while the whole world is talking about goals, stars, and packed stadiums, another story is unfolding behind the scenes. A story about money. A lot of money. FIFA is projected to earn nearly $9 billion from the 2026 World Cup. Hotels are raising their prices. Sponsors are making a fortune. Television stations sell advertisements at record prices. But there is one question few people ask. Who is paying the bill for all of that? Is it the retiree living on Social Security? An elderly couple has to calculate every single medical bill? Or those who don't even watch a minute of football? In today's video, we will trace every dollar of the 2026 World Cup to find out who is really benefiting, who is bearing the costs, and why the world's biggest sporting event could directly impact the wallets of millions of American seniors. Let's get started. Before we talk about who benefits from the World Cup, there is one thing that needs to be clarified right from the start. Most people think of the World Cup as a gigantic economic machine. Money flows in, money flows out, and everyone benefits in some way. Sounds reasonable. But the truth is much stranger. The World Cup is not an economy. It is two completely different economies happening simultaneously in the same location. Imagine a gigantic casino in the heart of the city. Inside, the lights shine brightly. People in luxurious suits walk across the red carpet. Money is exchanged continuously. Everything looks really glamorous. That was the first World Cup. The world of FIFA, television networks, global sponsors, VIP areas, and billion-dollar contracts. But outside the casino, there is another world. The police are working overtime. Workers set up barriers. The city is upgrading the roads. The people endure traffic congestion. The local government spends money on security, operations, and public services. That is the second World Cup. And here's the twist that very few people notice. These two worlds do not share money equally. One side mainly collects money. One side mainly spends money. In other words, the dealer in a casino and the person who cleans the floor after the casino closes do not receive the same reward. That's why an organization can expect to rake in billions of dollars from the World Cup, while some host cities still have to worry about additional costs. That is also why communities living near the stadium sometimes do not feel their lives have improved after the final whistle blows. And this is the most thought-provoking part for many older Americans. When we hear numbers like $8 or $9 billion in revenue, we often assume that money will benefit everyone. But the money in the World Cup doesn't move the way we imagine. It's more like a complex piping system than a common lake. Some pipes suck money in very strongly. Some pipelines only receive the last drops. Therefore, the question of this video is not whether the World Cup generates money or not. Of course it does. The real question is, where is the money going? Who is sitting at the cash register? Who is holding the bill? And why do so many elderly people who don't even watch a single football match feel increasing financial pressure while the World Cup's revenue figures keep breaking records? In the next part, we will meet the most important character of this story, an organization holding billions of dollars, but legally referred to as a non-profit organization. There is an old saying that life often proves to be true. Sometimes the things that sound the most absurd are actually true. And if there is a perfect example of that, it might just be right in the middle of the 2026 World Cup. Let's start with a number. Until recently, FIFA held approximately $4.7 billion in cash and financial reserves. To put it simply, it is no longer the scale of an ordinary sports organization. That is an amount of money that many cities, even many small countries, must look at with admiration. In the current World Cup cycle, FIFA is expected to generate around $13 billion in revenue, and the 2026 World Cup alone could bring in nearly $9 billion. Just take a moment to feel those numbers. Billions of dollars. Not millions, it's billions. And the interesting thing is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. But this is when the story starts to get strange. FIFA is legally registered as a non-profit organization, It sounds like a small community organization, a local charity, or a volunteer group raising funds for children. But no. We are talking about the organization behind the biggest sporting event on the planet. An organization capable of signing billion-dollar contracts with television networks and global brands. Sometimes life is like a movie where the screenwriter has a slightly excessive sense of humor. If you are surprised by this point, please like the video, because what we are about to discuss will make this picture even more interesting. Meanwhile, in many places across the United States, retirees are still paying property taxes every year. They pay sales tax when shopping at the supermarket. In some states, they even have to pay taxes on a portion of their retirement income. Not everyone is wealthy. Not everyone lives comfortably. Many people are weighing the choice between fixing an old car or saving that money for next month's medical bills. That's not a complaint. That's simply the reality of life. And that very contrast creates an indescribable feeling. On one side are those who have worked for 30 or 40 years, still meticulous with every invoice. On one side is a system that generates billions of dollars in revenue and enjoys many special perks to operate the event. There is nothing wrong with a successful event generating profit. A more interesting question is, why do so many people always hear about the money the World Cup brings in, but rarely hear about where that money actually goes? It's like looking at a huge river from afar. Everyone sees the water flowing, but not everyone knows which canals are receiving most of that water. And this is the most thought-provoking point. In conversations about the World Cup, people often mention joy, travel, new stadiums, or the influx of international visitors. But few people question those who do not participate in that festival, those who didn't buy tickets, not wearing jerseys, not flying to the host cities. If they are not in the stadium, why is this story still relevant to them? That is the biggest twist of the entire video. Because in the next part, we will uncover an even more surprising truth. The largest source of money for the World Cup doesn't even come from the people sitting in the stands. And when you know where the money really comes from, you will understand why the World Cup today resembles a global media empire more than just a football tournament. If you ask an ordinary person how the World Cup makes money, most will give the same answer: selling tickets. Sounds completely reasonable. Tens of thousands of people filled the stadium. Ticket prices can reach thousands of dollars. Outside, there are jerseys, souvenirs, food, and all kinds of merchandise. Everything looks like a giant vending machine. But this is when the secret door opens. The real wallet of the World Cup is not in the stadium. It is in your living room, lying on the sofa where millions of people are watching the match on screen. And nowadays, it even lies in the phone in your hand. The biggest source of revenue for the World Cup is not ticket sales, but the broadcasting rights. Television networks around the world pay billions of dollars just to have the rights for audiences to watch those matches. According to many estimates, broadcasting revenue alone has reached nearly $4 billion, far exceeding what millions of fans spend on tickets to the stadium. The people in the stands create the atmosphere, but the people sitting on the sofa generate most of the revenue. The more I think about it, the more interesting it becomes. Because the most valuable product of the World Cup is not the stadium, not the grass, not the ball, but rather our attention. In the modern economy, attention has become a type of asset. And the World Cup is perhaps one of the most efficient attention factories on the planet. And there's one more noteworthy point. The 2026 World Cup will have 104 matches. Many people think that it is simply to have more teams, more opportunities for smaller countries, and more joy for the fans. Maybe that's part of the story. But from a business perspective, 104 matches also mean more hours of broadcasting, more commercial breaks, more primetime slots, more sponsorship contracts. In other words, each new match is not just a sporting event. It is also a new space to sell the attention of millions of people. If you find this thought-provoking, please like the video. Because the deeper we delve into the World Cup's financial flow, the more the picture diverges from what we see on screen. There is a lesson that age often teaches us. When we were young, we looked at the items displayed in the store. As we get older, we start looking at the bill behind the counter. The World Cup is the same. We get to see beautiful goals, emotional moments, and dazzling stadiums. But behind it all is a global business system operating with astonishing precision. And this leads to an interesting question. If most of the money doesn't come from tickets, if most of the money comes from selling viewers' attention, then who are the truly valuable people in this system? Audience? Fans? Or are the communities themselves providing the venues, infrastructure, and resources for the event to take place? Because in the next part, we will encounter an even greater paradox. Reports continuously talk about the billions of dollars in economic benefits that the World Cup brings. But when we take a closer look at the host cities and the neighborhoods living next to the stadiums, the story is not that simple. Sometimes, a city can win big on paper, while many of its residents feel no richer at all. There is one thing that age often teaches us very clearly. Not every big number brings a sense of wealth. You might hear on the news that the market is booming, GDP is growing well, and revenue is hitting record highs. But then you step into the supermarket and still see the grocery bill higher than last month. You fill up your gas tank and still have to watch the pump's meter run faster than you'd like. That's why I want us to pause for a moment on the numbers that the World Cup is often promoted with. Billions of dollars in economic impact, hundreds of thousands of jobs, record number of tourists. At first glance, it all sounds like a resounding victory. But this is the question that life often poses after the slogans have faded. Victory for whom? A city can generate billions of dollars in GDP from a major event, yet many residents within that city still do not feel their lives have improved. It sounds paradoxical, but it's actually very simple. GDP is like looking at the total amount of water flowing through a river. It tells you how much water is flowing, but it doesn't tell you who is drinking the water. Those are two completely different stories. The 2026 World Cup is an interesting example. Many reports forecast billions of dollars to be generated through tourism, hotels, restaurants, and entertainment. But upon closer inspection, a significant portion of that cash flow does not necessarily stay within the local community. Let's take hotels as an example. In some host cities, room prices have been reported to increase by up to 10%. A normal room priced at $80 a night can increase to $800. But this is the part that is less often mentioned. If that hotel belongs to an international corporation, most of the final profits may be transferred back to the corporate headquarters elsewhere. Money passes through the city, but it doesn't always stay in the city. Like an express train passing through the town, it creates noise, light, and excitement. But not everyone standing by the tracks gets to board the train. That's why many people sometimes feel strange. They see the crowds, seeing the hotels fully booked, seeing news reports about economic success. But when you open your wallet, life is still the same as before. If you've ever experienced that feeling, please leave your thoughts in the comments section, because this is not just the story of the World Cup. It is a story that many communities have experienced when major events pass through. And there is another perspective worth pondering. When cities prepare for the World Cup, they often have to spend extra on security, traffic, infrastructure, and operations. Those investments can bring long-term value, but they also raise a very human question. If at the same time, many elderly people are having to choose between money for medicine, electricity, and food, then how should we measure success? By total revenue? Or by the quality of life of the people living there? That's not a question with a simple answer, but it leads us to an even closer truth. Because in the next part, we will leave behind the billion-dollar spreadsheets and head to the streets right next to the stadium, where communities can see the World Cup from their windows, but still wonder if that festival is really meant for them. Perhaps the most perplexing part of the World Cup does not lie in the financial reports or the billion-dollar contracts. It lies in a very human question. What are the people living right next to the stadium getting? Because if you look from afar, everything looks wonderful. The city is being broadcasted globally. Tourists flock in. The hotels are fully booked. The streets are lit up all night. But life has an interesting habit. It always looks different when viewed from your own window. Imagine you live in a neighborhood right next to where one of the biggest sporting events on the planet takes place. You can hear the cheers echoing from the stadium. You see helicopters flying overhead, see the stream of people coming from all over the world, but then the next morning, you still open the store as usual. Still paying the bills as usual. Still worrying about the future as usual. That is the feeling that some communities near the host stadiums have described. In some areas, close to the event venue, community organizations reported that long-standing local festivals had to be canceled or altered due to event-related regulations. Some small businesses are concerned that tourists pass through their neighborhoods but do not actually stop to shop or use their services. It sounds paradoxical. Millions of people are right outside the door, but economic opportunities can be miles away. Sometimes life is like standing next to a big river. You see the water flowing very strongly, but the cup in your hand remains empty. That doesn't mean all businesses are not benefiting. Surely there will be those who do better business, restaurants with more customers, and hotels with full occupancy. But the question here is not whether there are benefits or not, but how the benefits are distributed. And that's where many people start to feel troubled. Not stopping there. There are residential areas where people can see the stadium from their windows, but many residents still feel like they are outside the party. They witness new investments, new projects, and new waves of people. But they are also worried about the rising cost of living, increasing house prices, and the pressure of community changes they have been attached to for a lifetime. If you have lived in the same place for decades, you might understand that feeling. The feeling of watching the familiar neighborhood gradually change little by little. Not necessarily better, not necessarily worse. It's just different. And sometimes what makes people sad is not losing money, but rather the feeling of no longer belonging to the place one used to call home. If you find this story thought-provoking, please like and subscribe to the channel. Because in the next few minutes, we will reach the part that is perhaps the most relatable to many viewers watching this video. Because after all the discussions about FIFA, revenue, and host cities, there is still a group of people who almost never appear on World Cup promotional posters. Retirees. Those who are living on a fixed income, those who do not buy tickets, do not go to watch the matches, but still feel the clear impact of the economic decisions happening around them. And that's when the story shifts from football to something much bigger. It's no longer a question of which neighborhood benefits, but rather the question of who is having to adapt the most in an economy where events are getting bigger and the budgets of many elderly people are having to be calculated more carefully. At this point, perhaps we need to pause for a moment and ask a very simple question. Where do the elderly appear in this entire story? Because if you watch the World Cup commercials, you will see the brightly lit stadiums, the young fans, the vibrant cities, and the energetic moments. The camera rarely focuses on the 72-year-old woman sitting at the kitchen table calculating the electricity bill. It's also rare for people to mention the retired man trying to stretch his Social Security until the end of the month. But that's where the story starts to become relatable. Not because the elderly are football fans, but because they are the ones who feel the value of every single penny the most. When we are young, we often think about income. As we get older, we think about costs. A 30-year-old might see a project worth hundreds of millions of dollars and think of the opportunity. A 70-year-old might look at the same project and wonder, is that amount enough to repair how many bridges, upgrade how many hospitals, or support how many struggling communities? Not because they are pessimistic, but because they have lived long enough to understand that every decision has an opportunity cost. Life has taught them that when money goes in one direction, it won't go in another. And that is what makes this topic worth pondering. This is not an argument against the World Cup, not against sports, not against joy. People always need moments to celebrate and connect. The issue lies in the deeper question. What are we prioritizing? In the same country, there are cities preparing hundreds of millions of dollars for major events. Meanwhile, many elderly people are still having to make very mundane decisions. Should we replace the air conditioner this year? Should I postpone the doctor's visit for a few more months? Should we help him go to college or keep that savings for the coming years? Those questions do not appear on billboards, but they exist in millions of homes. And perhaps that is why many older viewers feel something familiar in this story, even if they have never watched a World Cup match. Because this is essentially a story about the feeling of being left behind by increasingly larger numbers. When everything around seems to be becoming more grandiose, more expensive, and more complicated, while their lives still revolve around very basic needs: health, stability, and a bit of peace. If you've ever felt the same way, please share your thoughts in the comments. I believe that many people watching this video will understand exactly that feeling. And this is the most thought-provoking thing. Perhaps the important question is not whether the World Cup is worth it, but rather who is being invited to the party, who is standing outside the door, and who is contributing money for the party to take place. Because in the next part, we will step out of the World Cup story to see a much bigger picture. A pattern is repeating from the World Cup to the Olympics, from the Super Bowl to many other major events. And when we piece all the pieces together, we will understand why the problem might not actually lie in football at all. When we start this video, we talk about the World Cup. Then we talk about FIFA. Then there are the host cities, the residential areas, and the elderly. But by now, perhaps you've realized one thing. The real issue might not be the World Cup. The World Cup is just where the story becomes more visible, because if we take a few steps back, we will see the same pattern appearing in many other places. Tavernhor, Super Bowl, global-scale festivals, even many modern industries. Those who own brands, copyrights, data, and broadcasting rights often receive the majority of the economic value. Meanwhile, those who provide venues, infrastructure, public services, and local resources often bear the majority of the operating costs. That's not a criticism. That's simply how many modern economic systems are operating. If the last century was built around factories, land, and machinery, this century is increasingly being built around intangible assets. A logo, a brand, a broadcasting license, a digital platform, a data file. Things you can't hold in your hands can sometimes be worth more than $1 billion stadium. That is the reversal that many people in the older generation have witnessed throughout their lives. In the past, the owner of the factory was often the strongest person. Nowadays, a lot of value lies in the unseen. As value increasingly focuses on intangible assets, costs are often widely distributed. Each person contributes a little. Each community contributes a little. Each city contributes a little. No one feels the entire weight. But everyone shares a part. It's like a gigantic roof supported by thousands of small pillars. Each column bears only a part of the pressure. But if you look from afar, you will see the entire structure leaning on them. Perhaps that is why many elderly people find something familiar in stories like this. They have lived long enough to realize that sometimes what matters is not who makes the most money, but rather who has the power to decide the direction of the money flow. And before concluding, I would like to leave a question. Is this the new model of the modern economy? A world where value is increasingly concentrated at the top, while costs are distributed downwards? Or is this just a transitional phase that will change in the future? In the final part, we will return to the simplest yet most important question of the entire video. After all the stadiums, the billion-dollar contracts, and the flashy economic reports, who really gets the final bill? Perhaps the most interesting thing about the World Cup is that it always ends the same way. At some point, the golden trophy will be lifted amidst the cheers of millions. Victory photos will appear all over the world. The news will move on to another story. Tourists will return home. The temporary stages will be dismantled. The cameras will turn off. But the lives of the local people continue. That's the part that television shows rarely come back to tell. There is one thing that age often teaches us. The glamorous moments often pass by very quickly. But the consequences and benefits of major decisions linger for a long time. That's why, after everything we've discussed today, I don't think the most important question is how much money the 2026 World Cup will make. Perhaps the more important question is this: are the people who facilitate the event getting their fair share? Do the communities living next to the stadium really benefit? Do small businesses have the opportunity for long-term growth or just benefit for a few short weeks? And the elderly, who do not appear in the World Cup advertisements but are still part of the local economy, Do they feel their lives have improved after all those investments? Maybe each person will have a different answer. And that is also what makes this discussion worthwhile. Because the World Cup is not just a story about football, it is a story about choices. But the question is whether ordinary people feel like they are a part of that success. If the answer is yes, the World Cup will be remembered as a worthwhile investment. If the answer is no, the record numbers will eventually just be numbers. And now, I would really like to hear your opinion. In your opinion, is the 2026 World Cup a smart investment for the host cities or an overly expensive gamble? Who stands to benefit the most? And who is paying the highest price? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoy videos analyzing economic and social issues and the stories quietly shaping our lives, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next content. The video content is constructed with the purpose of commenting, analyzing, and discussing socio-economic issues based on data, reports, and publicly available information from various sources. The video is not intended to attack, blame, or harm any individual, organization, business, or community. All opinions presented aim to encourage dialogue and constructive critical thinking. Thank you for taking the time to watch until the end of the video. See you in the next videos.